have died as well as he. My word, how she entreated me for her little chap. But I told her that as she had turned the scorpion, she had, through that very fact, and of her own free will, become engaged to me, and that she did not need to have two men engaged to her, which was true enough. As for you, you did not exist. You had ceased to exist, I tell you, and you were going to die with the other. Only, mocked me Dagora, when you were yelling like the devil because of the water, Christine came to me with her beautiful blue eyes wide open and swore to me, as she hoped to be saved, that she consented to being my living wife. Until then, in the depths of her eyes, Dagana, I had always seen my dead wife. It was for the first time I saw my living wife. There. She was sincere, as she hoped to be saved. She would not kill herself. It was a bargain. Half a minute later, all the water was back in the lake, and I had a hard job with you, Dorgana, for upon my honor, I thought you were done for. However, there you were. It was understood that I was to take you both up to the surface of the earth. Then at last I cleared the Louis Philippe room for you. I came back alone. What have you done with the victim Dechani? Asked the Persian, interrupting him. You see, Dargana, I couldn't carry him up like that at once. He was a hostage. But I could not keep him in the house on the lake either because of Christine. So, whiff of the Misandrine scent had left him as limp as a rag. In the communist dungeon, which is the most deserted and remote part of the opera, below the fifth cellar, where no one ever comes and where no one ever hears you. Then I came back to Christine. She was waiting for me. Eric here rose solemnly. Then he continued. But as he spoke, he was overwhelmed by all his former emotion and began to tremble like a leaf. Yes. She was waiting for me. Waiting for me erect and alive, a real living bride, as she hoped to be saved. And when I came forward more timid than a little child, did not run away. No, she stayed. She waited for me. I even believe, Dagana, that she put out her forehead. A little. Oh, not much. Just a little. Like a living bride. And I kissed her. And she did not die. Oh, how good is it, Dorgana, to kiss somebody on the forehead? You can't tell. But my mother, Dorgana, my poor unhappy mother, would never let me kiss her. She used to run away and throw me a mask. Nor any other woman. Ever, ever. You can understand. My happiness was so great I cried. And I fell at her feet crying. I kissed her feet, her little feet, crying. You're crying too, Durgana. And she cried also. The angel cried. Eric sobbed aloud, and the Persian himself could not retain his tears. In the presence of that masked man, who with his shoulders shaking and his hands clutched to his chest, was moaning with pain and love by turns. Yes, Durgana, I felt her tears flow on my forehead. On mine. They were soft. They were sweet. They trickled under my mask. They mingled with my tears in my eyes. They flowed between my lips. Listen, Durgana, listen to what I did. I tore off my mask so as not to lose one of her tears. And she did not run away. She did not die. She remained alive, weeping over me with me. We cried together. I have tasted all the happiness the world can offer. And Eric fell into a chair, choking for breath. I am not going to die yet. Presently I shall. But let me cry. Listen, Durgana, listen to this. While I was at her feet, I heard her say, "Poor unhappy Eric." And she took my hand. I had become no more, you know, than a poor dog ready to die for her. I mean it, Durgana. I held in my hand a ring, a plain gold ring, which I had given her, which she had lost, and which I had found again. A wedding ring, you know. I slipped it into her little hand and said, "There. Take it. Take it for you. And him. It shall be my wedding present. A present from your poor, unhappy Eric. I know you love the boy. Don't cry anymore." She asked me in a very soft voice what I meant. Then I made her understand that where she was concerned, I was only a poor dog ready to die for her, but that she could marry the young man when she pleased, because she had cried with me and mingled her tears with mine. Eric's emotion was so great that he had to tell the Persian not to look at him, for he was choking and must take off his mask. The Durgana went to the window and opened it. His heart was full of pity, but he took care to keep his eyes fixed on the trees of the Tuileries Gardens, lest he should see the monster's face. I went and released the young man. He continued, and I told him to come with me to Christine. They kissed before me in the Louis Philippe room. Christine had my ring. I made Christine swear to come back one night when I was dead, crossing the lake from the Rue Scribe side, and bury me in the greatest secrecy with the gold ring, which she was to wear until that moment. I told her where she would find my body and what to do with it. Then Christine kissed me for the first time, herself here on the forehead. Don't look, Durgana. Here on the forehead. On my forehead. Mine. Don't look, Durgana. And they went off together. Christine had stopped crying. I alone cried. Durgana, Durgana. If Christine keeps her promise, she will come back soon. The Persian asked him no questions. He was quite reassured as to the fate of Raoul Duchesne and Christine Daae. No one could have doubted the word of the weeping Eric that night. The monster resumed his mask. I would, but I can't because the strap is, like, it got busted between takes, and I tried to hot glue it, but it's, like, way too big now, so I can't replace it. Sorry. I would just have to, like, hold it in place, so I'm sorry, but you're not gonna see me don the mask this segment. I've lost my place. And collected his strength to leave Durgana. He told him that when he felt his end to be very near at hand, he would send him, in gratitude for his kindness, which the Persian had once shown him, that which he held dearest in the world, all Christine Daae's papers, which she had written for Raoul's benefit and left with Eric, together with a few objects belonging to her, such as a pair of gloves and a shoe buckle and 2 pocket handkerchiefs in reply to the Persian's questions. Eric told him that the 2 young people, as soon as they found themselves free, had resolved to go and look for a priest in some lonely spot where they could hide their happiness, and that with this object in view, they had started from the North Railway Station of the world. Lastly, Eric replied on the Persian, as soon as he received the promised relics and papers, to inform the young couple of his death, and to advertise it in the epilogue. That was all. The Persian saw Eric to the door of his flat, and Darius helped him down to the street. A cab was waiting for him. Eric stepped in, and the Persian, who had gone back to the window, heard him say to the driver, "Go to the opera." The cab drove off into the night. The Persian had seen the poor unfortunate Eric for the last time. 3 weeks later, the epilogue published this advertisement: Eric is dead. Epilogue. I have now told the singular, but veracious story of the opera ghost. As I declare on the first page of this work, it is no longer possible to deny that Eric really lived. There are today so many proofs of his existence within reach of everybody that we can follow Eric's actions logically through the whole tragedy of the Channies. There is no need to repeat here how greatly the case exceeded the capital. The kidnappings of the artist, the death of the Comte de Channy under such exceptional combination, and the disappearance of his brother, the drugging of the gas man at the opera house, and of his two assistants. What tragedies, what passions, what crimes had surrounded the ideal of Raoul and the sweet and charming Christine? What had become of that wonderful, mysterious artist of whom the world was never to hear again? She was represented as the victim of a rivalry between the two brothers, and nobody suspected what had really happened. Nobody understood that, as Raoul and Christine had both disappeared, both had drawn far from the world to enjoy a happiness which they would not have cared to make public after the inexplicable death of the Count Philippe. They took the train one day from the northern railway station of the world. Possibly I too shall take the train at the station one day and go and seek around thy lakes, O Norway, O silent Scandinavia, for perhaps still living traces of Raoul and Christine, and also Mama Valerius, who disappeared at the same time. Possibly someday I shall hear the lonely echoes of the north repeating and singing of her who knew the angel of music. Long after the case was pigeonholed by the unintelligent care of Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction Frere, the newspapers made efforts at intervals to fathom the mystery. One evening paper alone, which knew all the gossip of the theater, said, "We recognize the touch of the opera ghost." And even that was written by way of irony. The Persian alone knew the whole truth, and held the many proofs which came to him with precious relics promised by the ghost. It fell to my lot to complete those proofs, with the aid of Gergana himself. Day by day I kept him informed of the progress of my inquiries, and he directed them. He had not been to the opera for years and years, but he had preserved the most accurate recollection of the building, and there was no better guide than he possible to help me discover its most secret recesses. He also told me where to gather further information, whom to ask, and he sent me to call on Monsieur Poligny at a moment when the poor man was nearly drawing his last breath. I had no idea that he was so very ill, and I shall never forget the effect which my questions about the ghost produced upon him. He looked at me as if I were the devil, and answered only in a few incoherent sentences, which showed, however, and that was the main thing, the extent of the perturbation which OG in his time had brought into that already very restless life. For Monsieur Poligny was what people called a man of pleasure. When I came and told the Persian of the poor result of my visit to Monsieur Polygamy. The Durgana gave a faint smile and said, Polygamy never knew how far that extraordinary blackguard of an Eric humbugged him. The Persian, by the way he spoke of Eric, sometimes as a demigod, and sometimes as the lowest of the low. Polygamy was superstitious, and Eric knew it. Eric knew most things about the public and private affairs of the opera. When Monsieur Polygamy heard a mysterious voice tell him in box 5 of the matter in which he used to spend his time and abuse his partner's confidence, he did not wait to hear any more. Thinking at first that it was a voice from heaven, he believed himself damned. And then, when a voice began to ask for money, he saw that he was being victimized by a shrewd blackmailer, to whom de Benin himself had fallen prey. Both of them, already tired of management for various reasons, went away without trying to investigate further into the personality of the curious OG, who had forced such a singular memorandum book upon them. They bequeathed the whole mystery to their successors, and heaved a sigh of relief when they were rid of a business that had puzzled them without amusing them in the least. I then spoke of the two successors and expressed my surprise that in his memoirs of a manager, Monsieur Moncharmin should describe the Opera ghost's behavior at such length in the first part of the book and hardly mention it at all in the second part. In reply to this, the Persian, who knew the memoirs as thoroughly as if he had written them himself, observed that I should find the explanation of the whole business if I would just recollect a few lines which Moncharmin devoted to the ghost in the second part, for said, I quote these lines, which are particularly interesting because they describe a very simple manner in which a famous incident of 20,000 francs was closed. As for the OG, some of those curious tricks I have related in the first part of my memoirs. I will only say that he redeemed by one spontaneous fine action all the worry which he had caused my dear friend and partner. And I am bound to say myself, he felt, no doubt, that there were limits to a joke, especially when it is so expensive and when the commissary of police had been informed for at the moment when we had made an appointment in our office with Monsieur Minfreud to tell him the whole story. A few days after the disappearance of Christine Daae, we found on Richard's table a large envelope inscribed in red ink with the OG's compliments. It contained a large sum of money which he had succeeded in playfully retracting for the time being from the treasury. Richard was at once of the opinion that we must be content with that and drop the business. I agreed with Richard. All's well that ends well. What do you say, OG? Of course, Moncharmin, especially after the money had been restored, continued to believe that he had, for a short while, been the butt of Richard's sense of humor, whereas Richard, on his side, was convinced that Moncharming had amused himself by inventing the whole of the affair of the opera ghost in order to revenge himself for a few jokes. I asked the Persian to tell me by what tricks the ghost had taken 20,000 francs from Richard's pocket, in spite of the safety pin. He replied that he had not gone into this detail, but that if I myself cared to make an investigation on the spot, I should certainly find the solution to the riddle in the manager's office by remembering that Eric had not been nicknamed the trapdoor lover for nothing. I promised the Persian to do as soon as I had time, and I may as well tell the reader at once that the results of my investigation were perfectly satisfactory, and I hardly believed that I should ever discover so many undeniable proofs of the authenticity of the feats ascribed to the ghosts. The Persian's manuscript, Christine Daae's paper, the statements made to me by the people who used to work under Monsieur Richard and Moncharming, by little Meg herself, the worthy Madame Gurley, I am sorry to say is no more, and by Sorelli, who is now living in retirement at Lovanchians, all the documents related to the existence of the ghost, which I propose to deposit in the archives of the opera. I have been checked and confirmed by a number of important discoveries of which I am justly proud. I have not been able to find the house on the lake, Eric's having blocked up all the secret entrances. Even so, I am convinced that it would be easy to reach in and drain by draining the lake, as I have repeatedly requested the Ministry of Fine Arts to do. I was speaking about it to Monsieur Dujarnin Brenemes, and under secrecy for fine arts, only 48 hours before the publication of this book. Who knows but that the score of Don Juan Triumphant might yet be discovered in the house on the lake. I have discovered the secret passage of the communists, the planking of which is falling to pieces in parts, and also the trapdoor through which Rao and the Persian penetrated into the cellars of the opera house. In the communist dungeon, I noticed numbers of initials traced on the wall by the unfortunate people confined in it. And among these letters were an R and a C, RC, Raldachani. The letters are there to this day. If the reader will visit the opera one morning and ask leave to stroll where he pleases without being accompanied by a stupid guide, let him go to box 5 and knock with his fist or stick on the enormous column that separates this from the stage box. You will find that the column sounds hollow. After that, do not be astonished by the suggestion that it was accompanied by the voice of the ghost. There is room inside the column for two